Has there ever been a point in your athletic career when you realized you started to dread being there? Hi, my name is Kendall and for my senior project this year, I decided to research the obstacles and inequities in sports. As a four-sport athlete, I grew up in the athletic world. I've gained a lot from my participation, but it's also taught me that there needs to be change. My project consisted of me doing interviews to athletes, refs, spectators, and even athletic directors to view their view on this topic. I would then end every interview with the same question. This question being, if you could change anything about athletics to make it a more positive environment, what would you change and why? As you can see on the board above, I would then post what they answered the question with, along with an action shot of themselves. One quote that came from my interviews from a fellow athlete here at Bow High that stuck with me was this: if I were to change an aspect of sports to make it a more positive environment, I would make the stakes of the sports less serious in high school. Making it less serious in high school puts less pressure on the players during practice and games and makes it more fun. After hearing this, that last sentence really struck me. Now, if you don't play high school sports, let me paint a picture for you. You know that feeling that you get before you have a big test or you have a project the next day that you haven't started? This is what it feels like almost every game or even practices for athletes. These young kids are set in this mindset that if they don't play like they're the best kid on the court or the field, then they're simply not good enough. They live with constant weight on their shoulders, and that if they have a bad game or a bad play, then the next one has to be perfect, or their coach will never play them again. But this feeling doesn't only happen to just high school athletes. This is Victoria Garrick. Many might have seen her on social media, but don't know her story. She's a former student at the University of South Carolina and was also on their women's volleyball team. Victoria uses all of her social media platforms to talk about her story and how sports affected her mental health. She shares that she worked so incredibly hard in her high school years to prove to everyone and herself that she could play at a D1 level. Once she gets to that level, she realizes how much effort it really takes. She works day in and day out to become a starter. And by her sophomore year, she is. She thinks everything has fallen into place for her and things are starting to look up. This is until she realizes having this spot is amazing, but she still needs to maintain it. She then finds herself in the gym every day, practicing to get better. Before, after practice, and even off days. When this happens, she notices that her grades are starting to drop. This is because all of her focus is on volleyball. She has no time for school, friends, because she has to keep practicing. Volleyball has become not only her whole personality, but her whole life. All she can think about is that someone out there is working harder than her, and she will do everything in her power to work harder than them. She notices herself not feeling the same happy and positive girl she used to be. But she doesn't have time to recognize this feeling because she has to keep practicing. Mental health wasn't talked about enough in that day and age, so she didn't feel the need to reach out. This is why she feels the need that you need to ask others for help if you're starting to feel the same way that she did. After doing further investigation on her, I've also came across studies that she did with athletes and mental health. Her studies show that 80% of student athletes struggle with anxiety and/or depression, but do not reach out. This is why she believes it's so important to reach out if you are struggling and get the help that you need. This is why I made it very important in my project to include something to help athletes keep a positive mind. As you can see in the pictures above, I brought popsicles, candy, positive quotes, and even did tie-dye with athletes after practices or games. This gave them something to look forward to after their hard work. I even noticed that before I would give these athletes a treat, they would have a frown on their face from a bad game or bad play that they had. As soon as I gave them a popsicle or a piece of candy, their mood immediately changed. It was almost as like whatever happened before that moment just disappeared. Now, trust me, I'm a big fan of winning, but this reminded them that at the end of the day, whatever they might be playing is just for fun. This makes the stakes less high and less serious. But this wasn't enough. I also want to know how athletes felt on this topic of mental health in sports. So I sent out a poll open for the public asking, do you think college athletes should be required to see a mental health counselor? If so, how many times should they see them? My results show that 42.3% of people think that athletes should see a mental health counselor 1 or more times a month, while 34.6% say that athletes should see a mental health counselor 1 or more times a week. These results are very surprising because very little colleges require their athletes to see a mental health counselor at all. This shows that people are aware of this problem, but choose to leave it be. You don't bring awareness towards this topic to change anything about it. This quote I took from interviews just further my point even more. This quote was said by a coach who was also an athletic director. The quote reads, "Mental health has become more and more of an emphasis in sports over the last several years. It is something that has forever been neglected and not even considered. It is something that has forever, as coaches, we need to not only guide our players, but create an environment in which our athletes feel comfortable enough to approach us when they are struggling with their mental health. This shows that it's also on the coaches and not just the athletes to create an environment where they feel comfortable enough to reach out if they need help. In order for this to happen, they need to bring awareness towards this topic." Now, there are many stepbacks when it comes to sports. This being money, transportation, lack of interest, but most importantly, gender. Did you know that girls have 1.3 million fewer opportunities to play high school sports than boys do? This shows us just how segregated women and men are when it comes to sports. Women have fewer options to do the same thing that boys do. This is Billie Jean King. She is most famous for her efforts in changing how women are seen in sports. She herself was a very popular and famous tennis player back in the day and won many of her matches. One day, she was asked to play against a boy. People knew how good she was, but knew that she could never compare to a man. This is a day that history was made as Billie Jean humbly beat her male opponent and left everybody stunned. She changed how all women were seen that day. Now, I also want to know what the public thought of this matter. So part of the poll I conducted earlier, I included a question regarding gender. This was, do you believe that men's sports have more recognition/power compared to women's sports? And my results were shocking. My poll shows that 100% of people that answered thought there was an indifference between men and women in sports. This shows that we all know this is a problem, yet not much is done to change it. Society recognizes the problem at hand, but chooses to leave it be. This quote above came from a high school athlete when I asked her what she would change about athletics to make it a more positive environment. She answered with, "If I could change anything about athletics to make it a more positive environment, I think that having more support from fans at women's athletic games would really help. But that's hard for me to change." That last sentence really stood out to me. But that's hard for me to change. This shows that it's not only a battle one person can fight. It takes everybody in order for women to get the same opportunities as men in sports. Now, I know throughout this whole presentation, I focused on the downsides of athletics, but there are still plenty of positives as well. Sports gives an opportunity for kids to be creative, let out their energy, and make new friends. But in order for this to happen, sports need to become a healthy environment and let them know that at the end of the day, that their athletic career was something amazing. Now that my presentation is coming to an end, I would like to tell you the main goal of my project. As I said previously, I would interview a plethora of people to see what they would change to make athletics a more positive environment. For my part of changing this negative stigma around sports, I brought awareness towards it to show people how big of an issue it is for these obstacles are sports for this day and age. Now I would like to end mine by asking you a question, just like I did on my interviews. If you could change anything about athletics to make it a more positive environment, what would you change? Think about it, then change it. Questions? No questions? Perfect, thank you.